All right, everyone, welcome back to Nets in the Water. My name is John Barreto, stoking the flame of Catholic education, just trying to talk to educators, movers, shakers in the Catholic world. So I'm sitting down today with Chris Pastura, Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Diocese of St. Petersburg. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm very excited. So obviously heard your name plenty in this realm, being in the diocese. But before I even get into kind of your perspective on education in our diocese, particularly want to get into school choice and that whole amalgamation
Sure.
that I keep hearing about. But also I just love to hear your own journey into Catholic education. Were you raised Catholic? Were you 4 years old? Like, yes, I cannot wait to be a superintendent. Like, yeah, what was going on?
It's probably the farthest from that. So I'm actually the youngest of 8 children.
Okay.
Very, very Catholic family. My grew up, I think, like a lot of your listeners, in a house where I would say we were marinated in the faith. It was a very normal and natural part of our of growing up. My brothers and sisters were all in Catholic schools, and my parents ran out of money when I started kindergarten. So most of my brothers and sisters ended up having to shift to public school system in Cincinnati, and I was very well served by the public school, and this is something I think is important. I believe strongly in Catholic schools, and I don't think we need to denigrate anybody else, to say we're great.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean someone else has to be lesser. So when I got to be in the 6th grade, my very strange sequence of events, my dad was sick in the hospital, and we weren't sure he was going to make it. A Franciscan priest ended up attending him while in the hospital, and he was just talking about me and saying, my son doing well in school, we don't know where to send him. And this priest says, what about this place called Covington Latin, which I had never heard of, we had never heard of. It was across the river. We were in Cincinnati. It was in Covington, Kentucky.
Okay.
It's a unique school, to my knowledge. And what it did, and what most of the students did, is you skipped 2 grades. I went from 6th grade straight into 9th grade into high school. You tested in, and that was kind of just what you did in that day. And so that was my first time going to a Catholic high school,
wow.
and just found that it made the whole rest of my life make sense. Because it felt we were surrounded by, we were right next door to the Cathedral Basilica of the Assumption, which has the largest stained glass window in the entire world, surrounded by beautiful art, architecture, wonderful teachers, faithful priests and men of God, and it was a great environment for me, and it really made me feel like, okay, the world makes sense now.
So you went to this it was, I guess, Catholic high school,
Yep.
but you went there when you were supposed to be in 7th grade.
Yep.
And so during that time, you said it helped you make sense of the world. What does that mean? How does that happen?
If you've grown up like I did, and then when you go to school, you're surrounded by the same types of, you're surrounded by a prayerful environment where people do pray, and you're asking the questions that, at least I was asking, the big questions about life. What happens to us when we die, and what's the point of life, and what are we supposed to do, and how are we supposed to live, and what's the meaning? And those were the questions that I find that only faith can answer. And that's where I think, between the religious instruction we received, and again, just being in that environment, it made the world make sense. And we were with a lot of pretty bright kids, right?
Yeah, sure.
And
2 grades.
right. And so sometimes what can happen is that a religious training program can sometimes lack the appropriate depth it needs. And what I found there was, we had really, really brilliant people who, if you said, why should I believe that there's a God? They weren't just going to say, believe it because I told you. They were going to explain it in a way where you were like, wow, that was really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way that we can form kids in Catholic schools, by giving them the academic and formational tools to make sense of life and their faith and everything else.
Sure. Yeah. I think that idea of allowing someone to come to truth rather than just like dumping it on them,
Right.
that's a big cornerstone of Catholic education as well. That like, at least in my understanding of this, is like through our Catholic lens, all subjects no longer just have to be true. They can be true through the ultimate truth of God.
Right.
And these things can really get legs. So you had this education in high school, then college after. Did you get your own deepening of faith in high school? Were you always into your faith? Was this like a college thing, a post-grad thing?
I would say I was very much into my faith in high school. I think, though, the difference is you go from having the faith of a child to how does that become the faith of an adult? So ironically, when I went into college, I thought I'll be a communications major. At the time, I was thinking I would love to be a newscaster or something like that.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Xavier University in Cincinnati.
Oh, nice.
Jesuit.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at Xavier, you had to take theology and philosophy courses. I took my first theology course, and again, I said, okay, this is what I want to study. And so I ended up changing my major, going into theology, and completing that degree. And again, I credit the teachers, the people around me, and my family just for helping to deepen that understanding. And I'm not going to say it was a clear linear path, right? I mean,
Sure.
every one of us has a faith journey that includes struggles and
Yeah, of
challenges and all
course.
those kind of things. But in any case, ended up graduating and then deciding, if you have a theology degree, it felt like a natural thing because I had always done well in school, that teaching high school seemed like a logical next step.
Okay. So you studied this theology in college. When was your entry with theology more of a cerebral one or more of a personal one?
I would say both, in that I think I always had the personal understanding of faith. It was when I started learning more, it allowed me to connect head and heart. And I would have always said, for example, my mom's faith was one that was much more simple, and I'll say this, less sophisticated than mine was. It was very simple faith. But I always said, if you ask who the better Catholic, the better Christian, the better person is, my mom wins every day. So, but going through that experience, the study, the academics, the deep thinking about things that you thought you always knew, I think it just allows you to deepen your faith.
Yeah. I think it's similar to like building any relationship where it's like if I wanted to be friends with Chris Pastura, I would learn the things of like, well, where did Chris grow up? Oh, he was in Cincinnati. He had siblings. Where do you go to high school? Where do you go to college? Like, as you learn these things about someone, it allows you to deepen the relationship.
Yep.
So you have this experience after college. You taught in high school.
Yep.
How did you get from high school theology teacher to now superintendent of St. Pete?
That is a long and sordid tale. So,
Yeah, sure.
I taught in high school, and my joke that I tell people is I don't know that I evangelized anyone else except for myself. But every day when you're talking to students about saying your faith is important and it should be the most important thing in your life, and your life, sometimes you do have to sacrifice some of the things that you think you want for what, and merging that with what God is asking you to do. I was teaching, and I decided, you know what, I really was feeling called to missionary work. And so after my third year of teaching, I joined a group called the Comboni Lay Missionaries. And I was supposed to go to Africa. It's a Catholic group. I trained in Chicago for about a year, doing all sorts of training. And at the last minute, the African placements, due to visas and all kinds of things, fell through. I ended up going to Brazil.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I was learning Kiswahili, and then all of a sudden they're like, stop that, start learning Portuguese. So I ended up going there. And
How long of a run time did you have before learning you were going to Brazil? Was it like a week before, 2 weeks before?
I think we started the training officially in January in Chicago.
Okay.
And it had been postponed for a few months just with logistical issues. But so I think it was maybe mid to late April when I found out, actually, I'm going to Brazil. And we ended up leaving in late July, August.
Oh, wow.
So not a whole lot of time.
Yeah, but we were pretty deep into this African training. Okay, so went to Brazil.
Yep.
Didn't mean to cut you off. I was just curious the timeline of everything.
No, it was, it felt very much on top of things, right? So,
yeah, sure.
And part of, I do think part of Christianity, and maybe something we've lost, is the ability to say, I have not figured all of this out, and nor am I probably ever going to figure any of this out.
It's impossible.
But what is God calling me to do today, and go do it?
Yeah.
Instead of, I think sometimes we can endlessly think we have to be so prepared, and I don't know of anybody who's appropriately prepared for life or parenthood or any of those things, but we do them because we have this deep, abiding faith that God's going to get us through.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of like, I think it's a very, I don't want to say very modern one, but it feels like a modern idea of like, you need to be prepared or you need to have learned this before you can go do it. And within our faith, like being prepared or learned it, it's an absolute luxury, and it's nice when it happens, and I'm sure you felt very similarly. So after you went on this mission trip, somewhere between then and now, you are now the superintendent of Catholic schools for the Diocese of St. Petersburg. When did that shift happen?
Well, I spent a little over 3 years in Brazil. Came back. I met my wife while in Brazil. Came back. I went back to teaching. Started. I was a teacher for a while. I was a youth minister. In the first years of marriage, as I started teaching, I started realizing that maybe I had some ability to do some of the administration and the leadership as well. And I was always probably a little more of an iconoclast when I was younger, thinking, I want to teach, I want to be with the kids. Like the last thing I want to do is be an administrator, because they're doing all of this stuff with all this boring stuff with budgets and
all this
rules
paperwork
and policies, and that was the last thing I wanted. And what I started to realize is that those structures and those processes are what enable organizations to flourish and to do the great work that they do. I think anybody that looks at the Catholic Church and can say, we have a lot of slings and arrows pointed at us as Catholics, but at the same time, we've been responsible for education and hospitals and taking care of people and and really forming so much of what we call civilization and all of that good stuff. And what a lot of that took was a lot of people doing what other people might say are boring or meticulous jobs in places to enable the beauty to occur. So that's when I think I started making the shift, thinking, well, maybe I'll just, I'd maybe like to be a principal one day.
Yeah.
Assistant principal led to a position in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. I was called the Director of School Strategic Planning.
Okay.
And couple of master's degrees in there. I won't bore you with the details of those, but I had great experiences. Again, I got a second degree at Xavier, and then I got a degree from the University of Notre Dame, and all of those just dealt with all of the planning and administration and all those kind of things. So that enabled me to be. I was kind of an associate superintendent in Cincinnati, and then this position opened up in Florida. And some of this was driven, I would say, I had lived in Florida back when I was right after college, and My wife, being from Brazil, born 4 degrees south of the equator, winters were not her favorite thing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I said, honey, what do you think about moving to Florida? And she was ecstatic. So
Yeah, it was an easy sell.
yeah, and we did. You know, we had friends. We knew the area. I was familiar with the diocese at that point. So this was about 10 years ago. On a wing and a prayer, my wife and I and our 2 kids moved down and took this position of being a superintendent. And I think it's been a great journey for me. I would say ask my principals when I'm not in the room what they think, and then they'll tell you the truth. But no, we have the best principals, teachers anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. What's your ranking of principals, starting from the bottom?
Starting from the bottom, yeah, there is no way we're gonna have that conversation.
No,
but if you're listening, you know who you are.
No, I mean it is such a true thing. I think as I've had more conversations with educators, I feel like no matter what level I've sat down with, from superintendent to principal to teacher, it's always a matter of like counting on those people you're working with. That is such a source of grace for that person, especially principals to teachers, but in a similar way, superintendents to principals. If you have principals in your diocese that you trust, that are good at what they do, then it really frees you up to be able to do, I guess, more optimization of the diocese rather than maintenance of what's happening.
And they are the best people in the world. And what I would tell you is, the vast majority of them could go out and run a Fortune 500 company. I kid you not, because they have such a skill set that they can run a business. They understand children. They understand people. They understand the teachers. They're working with parents. They're working with benefactors. And they have to know everything from, at one point we all had to become experts in COVID and COVID mitigation and still run our schools. And that's very much a point of pride, I think, for us, both in the diocese. We shut down for the 3 weeks that everybody shut down. Other than that, we were back up and running, and we had kids in our buildings, and that was an incredible testament to the bravery of our teachers and administrators. But the folks that are in our schools, they give so lovingly of their time, and it amazes me that we still get people to do those jobs, because they're so hard, and our principals really are. I can't say enough about them. I mean, straight to heaven. There will be no purgatory. They get the fast pass.
Oh man,
great.
No, and that also is just such a beautiful witness as a leader. To have faith in those that you lead is a real mark of your own grasp on the diocese, on these principles, and giving them the space to flourish. Yeah, it's just nice to hear of a community of that sort of trust. And in particular, with your role as superintendent, kind of what I want to get into specifically is this at-large discussion of school choice. I don't know a whole lot about it, and that's kind of intentional. And you just came up with an op-ed in the Tampa Bay Times about school choice. And I'm just curious about kind of what is it exactly, what are the arguments for and against, and where, as Catholic educators or as parents of a Catholic student, or even as a Catholic school student in the past, as just a Catholic, where should we stand, or what is your own advice for our outlook on this whole thing?
Sure. So school choice essentially says that parents are the primary educators of their children, which corresponds exactly to our Catholic doctrine. So if parents are the primary educators of their children, they are the most invested and probably in the best position to make an educated choice about where their child should be educated and by whom. And so the idea, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's been politicized. And I think throughout history, both of our major political parties have been on one side or the other of this, and they sometimes it just switches with who's in charge, which is kind of annoying to me. But I think the idea just started to was that when children are districted for most public schools, they're districted based on where they live, their zip code. And unfortunately, it's a fact of life. A lot of times the schools that serve those children maybe aren't the best for them. And I'm not saying that we could talk all day about resources and all that kind of thing. I tend to be a pragmatist, and I just simply say, okay, regardless of everything out there, is this the best school for this child? Is it really meeting the child's needs? And what school choice says is, instead of the dollars following, paying a public school system, we're going to let the dollars follow the child. So if the child, if all the children say, well, our public school's great, it's doing a great job, we have full confidence in it, great. That's where the public dollars flow. If those parents instead choose to send their children somewhere else, then they would have at least some sort of resource. Maybe it's a full payment, maybe it's a partial payment that would enable them or help them to do that. So in my case, for example, growing up, one of 8 kids, my parents struggled to make ends meet, like I think a lot of people do.
Sure.
That would have been incredibly beneficial to have that, so that my parents could say, yeah, we do want to be able to keep our kids in a Catholic school. And that's the same opportunity that I think we want to be able to give to everyone, regardless of how much money they make, how much where they live, what their zip code is, so that those things don't define us. So that what defines us is our ability to choose the educational venue that most meets our child's needs and most is reflective of what we as parents are teaching. Because I think there are a lot of people who have just said, there are parts of our culture that are scary. And as parents, we want to appropriately protect our kids, or probably a better way of saying that is appropriately prepare our kids for their entry into what can be a scary world. So having said that, that's essentially the idea. So how it works in Florida
is this tale as old as time also? Is this has this policy been around for a long time? Is this idea of school choice relatively new?
I think, economists talked about it, in theory for quite a long time. So I know it's been talked about for a long time. In Florida, I want to say the program started around 2005, 2006 under former Governor Bush, so Jeb Bush. There were some legal technical problems with it. So there were some legal challenges to it. It got switched. And again, the whole idea is what our government says is we're going to pay the family, and the family chooses freely the type of education they want. And that's why.
Does every family get paid? Is it a flat rate across all families? Is it a tax bracket thing?
So it started in Florida, and we had this in Ohio when I was up there, a similar program. There are different ways to do it. So the Ohio program, for example, started, and what they said is if your school got a D or F rating in the school system that year, then you could opt out of that school. They then moved to an ability to choose based on income. And that's the Florida program was based primarily on income, so it was designed for low-income folks. The problem you always run into is you don't want to create a program where people's incentives are going in different directions. And so give you an example of that. let's say you're a low income, you're struggling with your kids to make ends meet. You get a scholarship, you get to send them to a great school. Then, because you're the type of person that wants the best for your kids, wants the best for you, you're going to work hard, you get a raise. Now, all of a sudden, in theory, if that thing is strictly income-based, you just went backwards. So by improving your status, now you're maybe over that income threshold. So, like, what do you do with that family? So do you now take away a very real benefit so that by them working to better themselves, they're now in a worse situation? So in economics, we call that a perverse incentive structure.
Yeah.
In any case, over the years, I think our legislators really in Florida have been leading the way, and kudos to them. In my conversations, I know sometimes it's very easy to say, politicians, they're all. I've not found that. The legislators with whom I've interacted over the years in Tallahassee have by and large been very, very decent men and women who really are trying their best to give their best for Florida's families. So in any case, Florida, about 2 or 3 years ago, under a bill called House Bill 1, they said, you know what? Should it really matter? Because if you're going to a public school and you're a millionaire, you get the same education, right?
Yeah.
So they started just to say, well, doesn't it make sense that we just open this up to everyone and allow every single person who wants an education to be able to freely choose that? And that's been the law of the land for the last couple of years. So in Florida, the only income restrictions that are there, if there would be like a funding issue, and this is my understanding of the law, so take it for what it's worth, is that lower income folks would be funded first, and I think that's right. I mean, I think that's in the common good. But again, Florida's done, I think, a very great job of saying this should be something that every Florida family has the opportunity.
Okay. Now I'm gonna go down these rabbit holes. I'm gonna throw out to you everything that comes to my mind as like a possible argument against it. This is all like it's purely curiosity, or at least like a free discussion of it. This is not me trying to
No, please.
to shoot anything down. So, because in my mind, going to a Catholic school, like, while it would be helpful for a lower income family to have money to go to it, if you can afford it, like, similarly, like, isn't like that's a luxury. So, like, why should someone else's tax dollars go towards a family choosing a luxury? Whereas, like, with other luxuries, it's like if you want the luxury, then
you pay for it.
You make more money and you pay for it. If you can't make more money, then, like, my heart goes out to you, but it's a luxury. You can't get every luxury.
Right.
So why is this different?
I guess what I would say is, do we look at the education of our children as something that is a luxury item, or do we look at it as a fundamental obligation that we all have, not only to our own children, but to everybody? I think education is important for both our society as citizens of the state of Florida and of the United States. It's really important, and that honestly, that's why the whole public education system was formed, and that's why it was funded, because our founding fathers said this is really important to have an educated citizenry, right? So I would argue the point that saying it is not a luxury to have an education that mirrors the same values that parents want and have. And I would even go so far as to say, because people have brought up the idea about, separation of church and state and all those kind of things. I don't believe that a government school should be teaching a faith or a state.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that the whole idea is not that we should abolish religion from conversations about how we live our lives and how we best form our country, but instead, what we should do is empower citizens to bring all of those ideas and let the best ideas win. So that's where, in my mind, if if our local and state governments are saying, look, we have an obligation to educate children, what's the best way to do that?
Mm-hmm.
So do we have one monolithic system that to which everybody must, it's like everybody goes in and you all get this, or else you get nothing?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we start to say, maybe there are 1,000 good ways to do this whole education piece so that individual students and individual families are having their needs met on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
and let people choose what works best for their own kids? Because again,
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that a parent has more at stake in the education of their child than, for example, I'll call myself a bureaucrat in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Or in Tallahassee. So I think that system really more appropriately and I think more efficiently and economically can educate students. So your earlier question spoke to the question of how much these school scholarships pay.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a special needs category, and those are a little complicated, but generally speaking, they pay a certain amount. It's the same amount if you're, and it's based on county.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if you're K through 3 in Pinellas County, every child gets the same amount, which is
same amount of money to spend on a school.
Same amount of money to spend on a school. Now, this is where I think your question does have, just to clarify, let's say that the school that you want to go to is more expensive than that scholarship. Okay, then the parent does have to make up the difference. Now, in our case for Catholic schools, we have a very robust school and diocesan tuition assistance program where we really do our best to make this something that every family can afford.
When you mentioned this idea of it being based off of your income,
Mm-hmm.
it would make more sense to me of like, well, if I make less money, I need more assistance
Mm-hmm.
for education. And if it's not a luxury, then we should be assisting the people who need the help more.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a blanket across all people, then wouldn't that just be an upward spiral of like there's more money to be spent on Catholic schools or just school? Mm-hmm. So now school gets more expensive because more students
Right.
want to go to more schools, and it just spirals prices up and equals this like homeostasis
Yep.
of some people can go to this school and some people
Right.
can't afford it.
Right, and I think that's a very real concern. One thing that helps is if you have, again, we're not the only game in town, right? So, one of the things that we have to do is we have to make sure that our educational, I hate to use business terms, but let's call it an educational product.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that meets parents' needs,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is cost effective.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't, guess what happens? Somebody's going to go somewhere else. And generally speaking, I think a market-based approach generally tends to drive down costs rather than drive them up. And that's why I think the fact that a parent, if a parent comes into our schools and says, you know what, I gave you a shot, I don't like it, they're out the door.
Yeah.
And
now they have the money that they can
right.
do that.
And they have that ability. So if you're let's go back to you're a low income family that had one choice, and it's the local public school. And it might be a great school.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you like this little charter school or this other private school or this Catholic school that you feel can better serve your child's needs. You now have the ability to make that happen.
Could you choose another public school, or it has to be a non-public if you did choose a different school?
In Florida, I think around 49% of children in the state of Florida are not going to their districted public school. So in the state of Florida, this is another aspect of school choice, you can actually choose to go to another district. So you could choose another public school if that's your choice.
So I get another. I'm going to go to that in a second. This, like, the idea of a blanket rate. Mm-hmm. I'll use this example because I actually saw this interview and I kind of felt myself getting a little conflicted.
Sure.
It was in the Texas house, I think. And they were talking about Elon Musk living in Texas.
Right.
And that on a flat rate, he would be getting like 80 grand a year to send kids to school. I would have a hard time being a person in that area, not being a little frustrated that like my tax dollars are going to go towards this guy or whoever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be that extreme of an example, but like I could be making 100 grand a year and some guy down the street who makes $500,000 a year is going to get the same amount of money from our tax dollars as I will. So yeah, like would that be a little bit imbalanced maybe?
It would be but let's take your analogy and let's actually walk through what would really happen. Elon Musk, okay, by virtue of the fact that he would be a citizen of, I don't know where he lives. I'm assuming, okay,
Somewhere in Texas. I don't
okay.
even know. I'm not. Yeah, I saw this like a YouTube short a while
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah. Last time Elon and I we've not spoken in days. I'm kidding. But let's say that someone like Elon Musk, right? He has all these kids. Here's the reality: if his children go to the local public school, which he's clearly entitled to do, they might be actually spending. So when you're talking about tax dollars, the tax dollars might be double what he would get if he got a school voucher. So for those kids to attend, I think the fallacy is education is never free. It's not free in a public school. It's not free in a private school.
Yeah.
It's always costing someone money somewhere.
Got it. And he's paying higher taxes,
Right.
as well. So he's getting a smaller percentage of what he paid back.
But
I
you know,
guess.
in the op-ed that we spoke, that I spoke about, and this is all publicly verifiable. You can go on and you can go on websites and look at this kind of thing. But the amount of money that in some cases some of our public school systems are spending per student is double what that voucher is worth.
Got it.
So in theory, it sounds crazy, but if you give, if you're spending that half of the money for that millionaire, isn't that better than spending the full amount for that millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, whatever?
Got it. Yeah, and then the school costs less than the tax cost.
Right.
Overall. Okay.
But it is a rethinking of how we do education. And again, the difference is, do we want one solution? And I think, education as we know it today started in the Industrial Revolution. And it was this whole idea of we're going to separate and sort children. And it was an industrial model. So think Industrial Revolution. The kids come in, we put them through the education machine, and out they come, perfect citizens,
Yeah.
right? I think in our world today, we've realized that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work well for just about anything.
Yeah, totally.
And instead, there's the idea that shouldn't we have a funding system that is going to empower 1,000 good results? Whether those are, for example, it would empower an entrepreneur. So let's say they're not Catholic, they're not faith-based, whatever, and you get somebody who says, you know what, I was an engineer, and I want a special school that's going to focus on math and science skills, and create a very, very small school and take a select group of kids for whom that type of education would be perfect. It enables them to do that. And from a familiar perspective, I think you would say that any parent, I think, would tell you, if you have served my child and you've taught them about who they're supposed to be, and in faith terms, I would say if you can educate my child and get them to become more like the person that God intended them to be and created them to be, you have me for life. And I think I really believe that educational choice does a better job of that, because again, I tend to think, having the opportunity to have many solutions is better than one.
Sure. No, what would you say? I guess this is the last question about this that I have. that like wouldn't this end up just funneling more money to wealthier communities? Meaning, before school choice, there's public schools. The better funded public schools are in the better off areas. Now school choice is there, so now I can choose the best school. I'm going to go choose that school that's better because it was in a better off area, and I'm going to spiral, and more money is going to go to this school, but then they're not going to be able to fit as many students, then prices are going to get raised, and then it feels like another upward spiral. And then similarly, it could cause a breakdown in the community of poorer people where it's like we no longer have a community school. We no longer have this place where everyone is, and it kind of fragments those communities and focuses them in on these other communities.
I think I understand your question. Is there a danger of community fragmentation when different kids can be going to different schools, right, from the same neighborhood? Is there a danger of it? Yes, there is, and that's why I think sometimes our churches have to be better. And I say that as a lifelong Catholic, and before I forget, shout out to our priests and pastors, because again, I don't know that the people in the Diocese of St. Petersburg realize how lucky and blessed we are. We have such wonderful, wonderful priests and pastors. These are guys who, I mean, they really are just trying their best to be to take on so many things, and they have so many things on their shoulders, and so I encourage your listeners to make sure that we pray for them, because boy, what wonderful leaders we have. Anyway, our community organizations have to get better. As people, we have to get better at listening to one another, not allowing politics and every little opinion that somebody has to separate us.
Amen.
I even think in my own family, again, I'm one of 8. If we let every little decision we make separate us, I mean, we would never be a family. And I think even if you look at the very start of Christianity, Peter and Paul went toe to toe. In the very beginning of our faith, because of some ideas about what's the best way to bring about that faith. And I think Christ, in his wisdom, picked 12 very different people. He didn't say, look, I'm only picking one apostle, and that guy is the only guy you listen to. He picked 12 very different people. Yeah,
very diverse.
Who had
people.
very different ideas on how to launch those communities and how to bring them together. And I think that's something that we have to be better at doing.
I think in a sense, too, as we're saying this, school choice does that. Of like, it no longer is like these kids go to this school and then this demographic of kids goes to this school. It actually allows more of that intermingling of like, you might go to the school in South Tampa and meet a kid from West Tampa who has a couple parents from a different country, different life experiences. And now we're doing that. Now we're building a community of different people in these places that used to be more uniform.
And that was really my experience. So again, if I even talk about the high school I went to, my best friend from high school, I would say I don't know. I think he would not identify himself as being Catholic. I love him. If he asked me for my right arm, I'd probably give it to him. But I think hard about it, right?
Depends on the mood.
But what I'm saying is, and he lives out in Seattle, but I just think it enables you to be able to say, and I think our faith does. Catholic means universal, and I think as Catholics, it's our obligation to sometimes have tough conversations, to sometimes say, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with how you're living your life. In fact, I disagree with everything about it. But guess what? Christ calls me to love you and to pray for you. And I think that's an amazing thing about our faith. And I just think, okay, if that was the basis, and that is the basis of our schools, I'm not saying we live it that way every day. I'm not saying there aren't problems in our schools. There are. But that's what we're called to. We're called to this radical form of love that Christ teaches. And I guess I would just say if that were the way that everybody kind of operated, I think our world would be a much better place.
Yeah. I think that's a really great note to end this off, Chris. We're actually running out of time right now, but yeah, I just think that's a wonderful summation of kind of our call and our goal and what all this points to.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks so much
been
for sitting
great
down
being
with me. The way we end off this podcast is the same every time. We'll clap at the same time to end it.
Okay.
So we are out.